You've watched those cowboy flicks, good guy in the white hat, savage native warrior, beautiful blonde woman, drawn-out gunfight, complete fiction. The actual Wild West was wilder, bloodier, more unjust, and far more captivating. Right now, you're about to discover 20 true tales that feel like Hollywood scripts, but genuinely took place. Get your drink ready, shut the door, and stick with me because once you finish this, Westerns will never seem the same. Story 1. Bace Reeves, the genuine Lone Ranger. Bace Reeves entered the world as an enslaved person in the southern states, broke free when the Civil War erupted, and wound up in the Untamed Territories, where he mastered multiple native languages. Later on, he took on the role of federal deputy marshal, covering territory larger than several states put together. Records show he brought in over 3,000 criminals and had an intense commitment to following proper procedures. Bribes meant nothing to him, and he rarely needed to fire his weapon first. His handcuffs hung on one hip, his Bible on the other, respecting outlaws as people while never going soft on justice. Years afterward in Hollywood, they invented the Lone Ranger, a hero in a mask riding beside a native companion on a pale horse, living by a rigid moral code that seemed oddly recognizable. They simply neglected to acknowledge that the real version was a black man called Bace Reeves. Even now, most folks haven't learned his story. Story 2. Pinkerton, the wealthy elite's hired force. During the late 1800s, whenever powerful steel magnates and railway tycoons needed control maintained, they brought in the Pinkerton organization. This went beyond detective services. They functioned as a military force for rent. They guarded cash transports, infiltrated labor gatherings, and when negotiations broke down, they appeared armed with weapons, batons, and uniforms lacking official badges. During the notorious Homestead confrontation in Pennsylvania, they sailed in heavily armed to crush the strike and safeguard the plant, not those who labored there. The concept was straightforward. If official channels moved too slowly or remained neutral, wealthy individuals purchased their own enforcement. This private security approach sparked arguments that continue presently. How much influence does wealth command when deciding who can employ violence? Many came to view the Pinkertons as that very symbol. Story 3. Charley Parkhurst, the woman who deceived everyone out west. Amid the California gold rush, folks knew someone they believed represented the quintessential rugged Westerner, Charley Parkhurst. This person steered stagecoaches through bandit territory, spat tobacco in taverns, puffed cigars, and swore like nobody's business. In 1868, Charley walked into a polling place and voted for president, years before any American woman legally possessed that privilege. Death arrived in 1879, and the revelation followed. The physician and those handling the remains found out Charley was actually Charlotte. The entire community realized they'd been fooled for years by someone who quietly shattered every gender expectation imaginable. Despite everything, Charley remained celebrated as among the finest stagecoach operators the West ever witnessed. Historians still argue whether it stemmed from defiance, necessity, or simple hunger for liberty. Story 4. The greatest swindle in the old American West. Following the gold boom, while dreams of instant wealth persisted, two con artists appeared with an irresistible tale. They professed discovering an abandoned hillside in Colorado where precious stones littered the earth. They quietly planted counterfeit gems throughout the location, invited financiers and influential Easterners, and watched everyone crouch down gathering treasures from the dirt, naturally opening their wallets afterward. Capital flowed from major banking institutions, government officials, and even a Rockefeller family member. Adjusted for current values, we're talking billions in funding. What destroyed their scheme was geologist Clarence King, who methodically studied the area, recognized the impossibility, and exposed the entire fraud. Before the revelation became public knowledge, both swindlers had disappeared with the fortune, leaving numerous prominent figures embarrassed and serving as a stark lesson about avarice and wishful thinking. Story 5. Johnson County War, when wealthy ranchers waged battle. In 1892 in northern Wyoming, powerful cattle ranch owners concluded they no longer wished to coexist with modest farmers and settlers. They compiled a roster containing numerous names, branding these individuals as livestock rustlers, frequently without any evidence whatsoever. Rather than pursuing legal channels, they pooled resources, caught a train bound for Texas, and recruited approximately 50 gunfighters to handle matters through force. Once the armed contingent entered Johnson County, word traveled quickly. Farmers, merchants, and laborers abandoned their tasks, seized whatever firearms they owned, and trapped the group at a homestead. Tensions escalated so severely that Washington deployed the United States Army, not defending the residents, but safely removing the wealthy men and their hired shooters. Even today, throughout that western region, many recall the incident as the moment wealth overpowered justice. Story 6. Stagecoach Mary, someone you definitely avoided crossing. Near the close of the Wild West period, when most women still lacked voting rights, a formerly enslaved woman named Mary Fields became legendary across Montana's routes. Past 50 years old, standing over 6 feet, constructed like a football player, smoking cigars, and speaking her mind freely. The Postal Service required someone to transport mail along an isolated path filled with snowdrifts, predators, and criminals. Mary accepted the position, carrying a .38 revolver, keeping a rifle beside her, and completing her duty repeatedly. When her team of horses perished in a winter storm, she hoisted the mailbag onto her shoulders and trekked miles through darkness, reaching the next settlement. Saloon patrons joked that even the lawman seemed less intimidating, but for anyone awaiting correspondence from relatives, Mary never disappointed, not one missed delivery. Around those parts, that counted more than any decoration. Story 7. Buffalo Bill packaging native people as spectacle. Near the end of the 1800s, William Buffalo Bill Cody transformed indigenous slaughter into circus performance. During his productions, native performers enacted assaults on pioneer caravans, invariably overcome by white gunmen. Among participants was Sitting Bull himself, the elderly Sioux leader who'd actually confronted the United States military in genuine combat. He consented to touring with the company across Europe, even appearing before Queen Victoria, though he participated for payment and the opportunity to face those who'd labeled him their adversary. Behind the scenes, according to accounts, he frequently joked about audience shock at witnessing such a savage behaving so peacefully, while outside spectators departed convinced they'd experienced the authentic frontier, never recognizing the deception beneath the performance. Story 8. Belle Starr, the outlaw queen authorities never captured. When the West remained largely unsettled, Belle Starr gained notoriety for combining domestic existence with criminal operations. She wore fine clothes, rode quality horses, and showed no hesitation drawing the twin pistols strapped to her waist. She maintained connections with legendary figures including Jesse James and Cole Younger, knowing every escape route criminals and horse thieves utilized. Married to a Cherokee husband, she organized a gang focused on horse theft and providing refuge for outlaws traveling through her property. At 40 years old, she faced ambush on a rural trail and received a bullet in her back. Nobody knows with certainty who fired, which only deepened the enigma surrounding her legacy. Some claim revenge from a previous associate. Others suggest conflict with neighboring ranches, though nothing was confirmed, and her tale remains suspended between history and tavern gossip. Story 9. Alferd Packer, the cannibal-turned-national punchline. Early in 1874, someone named Alferd Packer volunteered guiding 5 individuals through Colorado's icy peaks right during the frontier era. Months afterward, he emerged alone in a tiny settlement, appearing better nourished than expected, possessing the currency and possessions of his traveling companions. His explanation didn't hold up. Suspicions grew. Authorities excavated the region and uncovered the corpses dismembered and partially consumed. During proceedings, the magistrate delivered the statement that made him infamous, declaring that Packer had murdered and devoured 5 Democrats. The sarcastic response attributed to Packer also fueled his notoriety. He allegedly claimed eating only the choicest sections. Eventually, the incident evolved into morbid saloon comedy, inspiring ballads, low-budget films, and even naming a college dining hall, leaving the nation divided between revulsion and fascination. That's the origin of among America's most infamous cannibalism accounts. Story 10. The Chinese constructed America, then faced expulsion. Looking back toward the late 1800s reveals a nearly forgotten aspect of American history. Along the railroad's most treacherous sections spanning the nation, substantial workforce numbers came from China. They handled explosives on precipices, carved passages through ice, and confronted avalanches, typically earning below their white counterparts. Countless died there without names recorded anywhere. Once the tracks finally connected Atlantic to Pacific and profits accumulated, attitudes shifted. Instead of appreciation, they received rejection. Congress enacted legislation essentially preventing new Chinese immigration and creating hardship for existing residents. Like numerous people then, citizenship remained impossible. They constructed massive portions of the country yet were treated as though invisible. Story 11. The Reno Brothers, Earth's inaugural train thieves. In 1866, within rural Indiana, the Reno brothers realized a train represented essentially a massive vault on wheels. They and their crew boarded after dark, overwhelmed the operators, disconnected the forward cars, and compelled the engineer advancing a brief distance. Distant from stations and assistants, they penetrated the mail compartment and seized approximately $13,000 substantial wealth then. Beyond successful theft, it demonstrated trains could be targeted like mobile banks. Subsequently, names like Jesse James and Butch Cassidy would replicate identical tactics, making train robbery an iconic Western symbol. For veterans returning from the Civil War penniless and directionless, hitting railways appeared profitable. Minimal law enforcement existed, communication lagged, and abundant federal currency passed through nightly. Story 12. Hell's Court. During the late 1800s in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the federal courthouse attracted nationwide attention. Presiding was Judge Isaac C. Parker, whom many labeled the hanging judge. He oversaw hundreds of proceedings for frontier crimes, territory where law typically arrived belatedly. Throughout his tenure, 172 defendants received their ultimate verdict from him, with 88 ending up on the scaffolding constructed beside the fortress. On execution mornings, rows of bound men crossed the compacted earthyard beneath silent crowd observation. Guards reported that before the signal sounded, you sensed heavy atmosphere perspiration, liquor, and absolute terror, as though the frontier itself paused breathing. For numerous men of that generation, Fort Smith symbolized an epoch when the noose represented rapid response to disorder. Story 13. Laura Bullion, the sole woman among Butch Cassidy's crew. Among all Wild West legends, Laura Bullion rarely receives mention, the only woman genuinely joining Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. A cowboy's daughter, accustomed to harsh traveling from childhood, she began carrying firearms, assisting with train heists, and circulating fake currency sustaining the gang. She employed documents bearing different identities, trimmed her hair when disappearing became necessary, and spent years evading sheriffs and Pinkerton operatives. Arrested in 1901 while still youthful, she served prison time in New York. Upon release in 1905, she abandoned her criminal identity and attempted respectable living, employed at hotels and lodging houses while avoiding discussion about her history. She passed away in 1961, quietly, in an America already featuring automobiles, aircraft, and color television, carrying memories of a West seeming like another universe. Story 14. Elfego Baca, 19 years old, confronted 80 cowboys solo. During the late 1800s, throughout New Mexico still nearly lawless, a youth named Elfego Baca, merely 19, decided becoming a sheriff and challenging Texas cowboys who acted without restraint in Mexican communities. After arresting one individual, roughly 80 armed riders encircled the structure where Elfego sheltered. Gunfire commenced, not lasting minutes but a full day and a half. Estimates suggest over 4,000 rounds struck walls, entryways, and furnishings. When smoke dissipated, Elfego emerged alive, virtually uninjured, while at least 4 men lay deceased and others wounded. Subsequently, he exchanged his badge for legal attire, becoming an attorney and regional politician, maintaining reputation as someone who'd stood alone against what resembled a miniature battalion. For countless people then, this account guaranteed saloon conversation evidence how determination could forge legend. Story 15. Pearl Hart, the final stagecoach criminal. As the Old West concluded, when nearly every outlaw had vanished, a young Canadian woman named Pearl Hart chose entering crime unexpectedly. She cropped her hair, donned masculine clothing and headwear, and grabbed a .38 caliber revolver. In 1899, outside Globe, Arizona, she halted a stagecoach, collected passenger currency, and departed with roughly $430 decent earnings then. What astonished the public wasn't merely the theft, but a woman performing something considered masculine work. Publications seized the narrative, printed sensational titles, periodicals featured her image, and she became somewhat a criminal celebrity. She stood trial and received conviction, sentenced 5 years, though served minimal incarceration. Following approximately 18 months, she gained release under the justification that prison wasn't suitable for a lady. Story 16. The Vanished Pterodactyl Photograph. In 1890, a modest newspaper in Tombstone, Arizona, reported some hunters had shot down an enormous pterodactyl in the wilderness. They claimed the beast had been displayed against a timber wall with men positioned alongside, and this scene appeared printed in those aged newspapers you envision lying around frontier saloons. The source image disappeared from collections and private holdings. Ever since, interested individuals have searched through microfilm, estate sales, and storage spaces seeking a single negative, proving whether the account was merely tavern legend or documentation of something unexplainable. Like countless Old West stories, as time advances, more people insist seeing that photograph somewhere, yet nobody can demonstrate where, which only intensifies questions whether we're confronting faulty recollection, printing trickery, or a forgotten prehistoric fragment dropping into the 19th century unexpectedly. Story 17. The most truthful tombstone out west. In Boot Hill Cemetery within Tombstone, Arizona, exists one story every veteran cowpoke enjoys sharing. A man named Lester Moore worked for a shipping company and entered a violent dispute regarding a parcel. Throughout the Old West, disagreements rapidly escalated into shooting, and he absorbed 4 bullets from a .44 caliber revolver. He never managed drawing his own weapon. No physician was available and he died immediately. Back then, the sheriff arrived after everything concluded and justice nearly always emerged from gun barrels. Years later, someone chose marking his grave with a brief, direct message, blending sardonic humor with sorrow. The inscription became local folklore, echoed in taverns, conversations, and visitor tours. Since then, travelers pause before the headstone, crack a slight grin, respectfully acknowledge, and recall how existence there could terminate instantly. Story 18. Rattlesnake Dick and the Gold Nobody Located. Throughout the gold rush, the outlaw Richard Rattlesnake Dick Barter disappeared into the Sierra Nevada mountains carrying proceeds from a significant heist, approximately $80,000 worth of gold, then sufficient wealth, transforming a family's existence for generations. Pursued by posses and lawmen, he chose concealing the ingots and nuggets somewhere remote, marking landmarks on stone and timber, later sketching a chart filled with irregular annotations, directional symbols, and distance calculations. Legend suggests this chart transferred between individuals through dusty saloons, rancher storage, and second-hand shop sales, though nobody successfully interpreted the precise route. The gold remains buried somewhere throughout the Sierra, awaiting misfortune for searchers and fortune for whoever accidentally discovers it. Story 19. The final genuine shootout of the Old West. During January 1919, throughout a small Nevada settlement, the Old West had already become nearly cinematic material. However, men still existed who resolved conflicts with triggers. 2 individuals who despised each other for ages confronted one another directly in the primary thoroughfare, each holding a well-used revolver. Shop entrances remained partially open, people watched from behind glass, and nobody dared intervening. They exchanged brief words, sharp and pointed, and conversation ended when their hands dropped toward holsters. Gunshots resonated, Timber splintered, dust kicked upward, and both men collapsed with fatal injuries. As they lay dying upon the packed dirt street, a different noise interrupted the silence. The settlement's first motorized vehicle rolled down that identical street, horn blasting continuously as though declaring the old method of settling disputes was ending and a fresh period was commencing right there. Story 20. The West never concluded. Ultimately, the so-called frontier never truly shut down. It simply relocated from the Dakota grasslands to Wall Street, to petroleum fields, to glass corporate towers, and to electronic trading platforms. The jewels departed the holster and entered agreements, into conflicts over territory, water resources, and information. The wardrobe changes, the environment transforms, but the competition remains identical. Whoever commands the capital and the intelligence establishes the rhythm, and everyone else scrambles, maintaining pace. If you've stayed with me throughout, you can already recognize the Old West concealed behind current news cycles. Share which section of this narrative surprised you most. Leave it in the comments section. Click like, subscribe, activate notifications, and join me because next week brings more behind-the-curtain material that never reaches the cinema. And remember, truth always outdraws the scriptwriters.